Okay, we are recording. All right, so there's a lot of different layers of things that I'm going to teach today. We're going to talk about the chakra system a little bit. We're going to talk about how that forms an electrical circuit and what aspects of kind of electromagnetism and electricity we can apply to how those circuits actually function and interrelate. So once we get through that, I'm going to talk a little bit and start with the throat area. So one of the things that I mentioned in weeks past is that we're going to go kind of sequentially through the different organ systems, attach the emotional states that are tied to those organ systems, as well as how the chakras interrelate with those, how the physical body interrupts the flow of energy through those areas, and some color puncture treatments that we can do that associate with that. So lots of different layers of things that we're going to kind of build through. And some of it might go a little bit over your head. So just do your best to kind of take what works for you and what resonates. And the rest of it will kind of fit in as is necessary for you. You may only need the practical stuff later, but you might just find the beginning stuff a little bit fascinating and it might paint a useful picture for you. So what I wanted to start with is I'm going to share a couple of let's see how to do this. Where do I want to start? So let's start with this image. Okay, so I'm going to share. Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm sharing this image because I want, we don't need to memorize too much of this for what I want to teach. I just want you to see where these are actually aligned. So you can see if you understand where the chakras are mapped out on the body, or at least vaguely understand where the chakras are mapped out on the body, then you will kind of notice that these different glands or endocrine glands are aligned with the different chakras. And so one of the reasons that I talk about endocrine color puncture so often being a regulating stimulus to the body, it has to do with how the color works with the different organs and how the organs associate with the different chakra points and how those different energy centers change how your organic circuit actually functions. So I just wanted you to see this map for now. We'll come back to some of this stuff a little bit later. I just wanted you to get an overview, to get an idea of how first, second, third, fourth heart chakra, fifth, and sixth chakras on up all kind of associate through these different endocrine organs, and how in that sense they all communicate, which is why endocrine regulation and making sure your system is regulated is going to allow those signals to flow through this in the way that we want. So keep that in mind just a little bit, and then we're going to switch over to a couple of different things. So I'm going to start with an analogy where and I'm going to build into a little bit of it more specifics as we kind of go through this. So I want you to start thinking of the body as both an audio circuit or an audio transducer, meaning a vibrational electromagnetic transducer. I also want you to think of it in terms of an electrical circuit, just in general. So I'm going to draw some different circuits out for you, and we're going to lay this out. But I want to draw some images in your head so you can kind of get an idea of how the body works. So the body is a vibrational transducer. All of our senses are vibrational senses. So whether we're using our eyes, we're using our sense of touch, we're using our sense of smell or taste or hearing, these senses all pick up physical vibrational sound tones. And those sound tones are basically passed through an based on electromagnet, but it doesn't look like a conventional electromagnet. But for example, our ears, when the physical sound pressures move the eardrum and the bones in the ear, those vibrate little hairs that start to generate electrical signals because those hairs move inside a magnetic field that is generated by your body. That then generates electrical impulses that are sent to your brain to cognize audible vibration. And the same thing happens in a similar fashion through your eyes and through your other senses. So we want to kind of understand that all of these in a fundamental way are all vibrational senses. And we want to see what would interrupt our body's ability to translate those vibrational senses. So the first image I want to show you is that of the grooves on a turntable. Make sure that's open. Okay. So here we have, oops, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. So here we have a vinyl record. So hopefully you've seen a vinyl record before. If not, this is a zoomed up photo of a vinyl record. And what you will see is that the vinyl record has all of these different grooves that are etched into the vinyl. And what happens is this needle, you have a needle that basically rides along the vinyl record and bounces from the left side to the right side across the grooves. And those grooves cause the needle to vibrate. That vibration is conducted through a tone arm that effectively goes through a magnetic coil. And that vibration is then converted to electrical impulse, the same way that our ear works. That electrical impulse then travels through down through the audio system. So one of the things that we want to look at here when we think of, we're going to use kind of the analogy of this turntable for a little bit, just because it makes it easier for us to conceptualize what's happening in our body. So you've got a couple of factors here that will inhibit the clarity of vibration being picked up from this needle. So if our body is a transducer of subtle vibration and energy, then we can look at this the same way, that this needle is a transducer of subtle vibration and energy. Well, what happens if we have a vinyl record that is spinning at the wrong speed? So if we have a vinyl record spinning at the wrong speed, the vibration picked up at the needle is going to be operating on a different rhythm. So there's one issue. The other issue is, what if the ground around the turntable itself, or the table that the turntable is on, is vibrating, is being smacked by your hand? Okay, so if you have a macro vibration or a larger vibrational state around this turntable, that is going to introduce additional vibrations into the detail that exists within this groove. The other thing that can happen is you can have this needle jump from the left to the right side of the track and skip over vibrations. You literally lose information that way. And so what I want you to think about in terms of the vinyl record and these details. So let's think of our 7D, our D7 aspect of self, or D6 aspect of self, where we get our original idea. So we get a download, we get information, we have frequency coming in. And that frequency is represented in the perfect gestalt that exists on that vinyl record. Our body is the transducer of that information based on how equipped our body is to read those vibrational signals through our different energy centers and create an out-pictured result based on what we're able to read. Now, there's a couple of things that can happen here. If the quality of the record is poor, then the best we can possibly get is the quality of that record. If the needle that reads the information has distortion on it, the best we can get is the version of the vibration that is picked up by that needle. If the record is old, that's the best version that we can get. And so what I want you to see there is that there are certain bottlenecks that exist at different points in this signal path. And what I'm going to help you see is where these map to our different energy centers and how they manifest in our conscious life so that we can track them in reverse. So what I want you to be thinking about when we look at this, we have a left channel and a right channel. And in our bodies, we are running a balanced circuit, a circuit with laterality that has left and right hemispheres, masculine and feminine principle that operate with the positive and negative polarities that we have at all times. So this is a really close analogy. And so what happens is, not only do we have the vibrational state or the vibrational sound tone that exists as part of this vinyl record or this download that we got, this then gets transmitted and converted into electrical impulse. So then we have to ask, okay, which system determines how that vinyl record gets converted into an electrical impulse? And let's say that the algorithm or the software or the analog processor that actually converts this into an electrical impulse is perfect, which none of them are. But let's say that it's perfect. It perfectly takes that vibration and it transduces it into a perfect electrical impulse. Well, then you have other things that actually read that electrical impulse. Okay, and so when that reads that electrical impulse, then we have a system that reads the electrical impulse and translates it. Okay, and so when you are paying attention to the way that this signal path works, you can start to see, okay, you have a perfect electrical signal in the ideal, and then you have other sources of noise that distort how effectively you can read this signal. So let's look at a couple of basics here. Let me log in on this side. Oops. Oops, I should have checked this before. And so what I'm going to show you in a second, I'm going to draw a couple of circuits for you, if I can. Okay. Let me make sure I can share the screen. Let's see. Okay. Okay, so hopefully I am sharing my screen here. Actually, let me start a new one. So I'll get to some of that in a second. So, okay, so hopefully you guys can see the screen. And what I want to, where did that go? I don't want it on that screen. Well, that's okay. So we have a couple of different things here. Let me actually, you know what? Let me show you this one first. So if we look at this image, we have all of our different, chakra points. Oops. Okay, in all these different areas. We have the vinyl record, which came through the top. And then that vinyl record is going to pass through the different energy centers where it gets output from the heart. And so what we have is a couple of different stages that our electrical circuit can actually go through. So a couple of things that we want to look at in terms of how a basic circuit works. So in a basic circuit, so let's see how this builds, because everybody's circuit starts at one stage and it gets more and more complicated as your consciousness expands. So for the most part, most people start with their circuit below this. Okay, so they're not aware of the stuff that happens above this, and they're only partially aware of what happens at the heart. Okay, and so what we usually operate with is just the subconscious, the emotions, and the irrational mind. All right, and so what I want you to think of is the subconscious becomes the ground, or the 0 volt reference. Oops, let me change this color. And so this voltage reference, the way that a power circuit effectively works, or an audio circuit works, is you use this 0 volt as the reference point to tell you what the output voltage is. So if, for example, to keep it simple, if I wanted to output 10 volts here, then my body uses this 0 volt reference to tell me how far the distance is between 0 and 10 to set the output. And so what that does is that allows a type of reference that can happen in a very simple circuit. So what that ends up looking like is you get the DC output, and this is referenced to ground. So ground being your first chakra, and the DC output being your fourth chakra. Well, what determines how well this circuit works? So we've got a couple of different things that start to happen here. So ideally, what happens, so there's a couple of things. Let's go back to the vinyl record for a second. So a couple of things happens here. When we have vibration, the ideal output, let me make sure I'm not on a new lane. Ideal from here, like if this reads perfectly, you're going to get pretend this is a perfect sine wave, right? So pretend this is a perfect sine wave. And when you read this vibration, you create a perfect output that exists, which is this top image here. Well, if somebody is smacking the side of the turntable or there's vibrational noise, the output from that signal gets noisy. And so you have all of what becomes the signal, instead of it being a smooth black line, it becomes this jagged red line. This jagged red line then crosses that magnetic coil and becomes your signal. And so we have to wonder, okay, what makes this signal stable like this versus unstable like this? And so this is where some of these regulation type ideas come from. Our ground, our root chakra, is going to be the hard drive. Well, yeah, I think I could talk about that now. So our root chakra is our cellular memory. It's our subconscious. It's our hard drive that stores all of our data from all of our lives. So our past lives, our future lives, our current life, time in between lives, time when we were a fetus, time when we were a baby. All of these different things get recorded in our cellular memory. And this cellular memory exists as part of this base or root chakra. This base and root chakra, on top of all these beliefs, has various distortions or implants that are part of the collective consciousness. Oops, let me make sure that I'm letting folks in. Are part of that collective, or part of the collective unconscious. And so that deals with abuse, trauma, shock, and devastation. And so we all on some level have connections to some of those feelings, but may not know where they came from, because they came from prior to this incarnation and we lost that connection to that memory, or it came from a number of different traumas that we experienced. All of our different traumas and programs are going to be imprinted. The problem is these imprints are not given a value. And so we don't have a value judgment attached to them. Everything that's experienced gets imprinted at the same level. Our cells, like our human body, go through a death and rebirth process. And so they're constantly living their life based on the belief structures and the traumas and the imprints and the implants that exist as part of that cellular consciousness. And then they replicate, and they die and are reborn, and die and reborn, and they carry their cellular memory with them. What happens is when you have a lot of imprint in terms of this idea of instability, so you're not stable, you're not secure, you have issues with kind of all of these root chakra ideas, which you can kind of find just by Googling root chakra imbalance. And so those end up creating a ground voltage, a 0 volt reference, that is not 0 volts. Okay, and so instead of having this baseline perfect reference point, you end up having a baseline that oscillates. This oscillating frequency is then what is referenced to the heart's output. When you have this oscillating frequency in reference to that, the output does this as well. And so you start to get different layers of distortion that can happen just as a result of the root chakra having distortion on it. Well, the circuit continues to get more advanced as you expand in consciousness. So now we have the emotional body, we have the rational mind, and then we have the soul matrix, the throat chakra, the higher mind. And there's a lot of layers of how these start to fit together. So when we look at this basic circuit, we can see that these kind of fit together in that fashion and produce just a generic output. And what happens is, for most people, they're not aware of the implications of how the emotional body processes this input voltage, and they're not aware of how the rational mind then makes adjustments to how these things work to try and get this output to match the way that they want it to match. So what happens is, as we start to do this healing work, we begin to recognize that there are different layers to our egoic experience. We've got the things that our heart output says. We've got the things that our rational mind says in terms of analysis of the information coming through. We've got things that are coming in as emotional energies. And then we've got just the subconscious programs that we're still working through. And this starts to build a balanced electrical circuit. And what that's going to look like is you have a ground, which is going to be C1. Let me see if I can change this actually. See if that'll work. Okay. So we've got ground, which is chakra 1, your root chakra. And then these are going to branch off into a balanced circuit. So you have, on one side, you have the positive masculine principle. And on this side, you're going to have the negative feminine. This side, the masculine side, is going to connect with the throat chakra, and the feminine side, the feminine side is going to connect with the emotional, instinctual mind. And so there's one of the things that I've said many times is that masculine and feminine are not, when we see them as imbalanced, they are co-creators of our output. And you'll see this as this starts to build a little bit more as I build this circuit. Okay, and so what ends up happening is most people try to fix one or the other because they're like, oh, it's wounded masculine, or oh, it's wounded feminine, not understanding how these actually are tied together and communicate. And so this is a really important factor for how this is all going to kind of map out and start to work for you. So these two communicate. We get an aspect of the higher mind. We have a signal, for example, the record that comes in through D7 or C7 is processed through the third eye. And ideally, what ends up happening is that information can go straight into both of the outputs. And so we get an input in, which is from, so let's see, which will be up here, or yeah, I think I'll do it that way. And then there's a couple of things that we want to do towards this input, right? Or towards the, well, actually I take that back. Let's make that the output because that'll make more sense. Yeah, okay, so what's going to happen here is there's got to be some way to regulate the circuit that exists here so that you get a perfect output. And so there are mechanisms that are put in place through the rational mind, which exists here. So this rational mind is also connected both to your ground in C1. It's connected to C2, C5, and ultimately C4, but I haven't drawn that yet, okay? And so what ends up happening here is when you have noise in your ground, that's going to change. So when there's noise here, that's going to change what this voltage and what this voltage are, which immediately, when we have a distortion in C2, that's going to throw the entire circuit up the chain out of balance. Okay, so this becomes off balance. If we have a distortion over here in the masculine principle over here, that's going to throw this side off balance. And then our rational mind's job is to look through its belief structures, look through and connect with the different levels of the mind, and bring this into a cohesive and coherent linear picture that can be presented to an output Okay, and so there's a couple of ways that this is going to start to fit together. So this is kind of the basic circuit, well, sort of basic, for how this expands. So when somebody starts, they just go straight to without awareness of these other centers within this game. They're not aware of the higher sensory perception that is required to actually start to balance these different energies. So when we look now, when we look at the different programs that exist, so I mentioned the root chakra and how those exist. But now we can talk a little bit about the second chakra a little bit more, and then we'll get into the fifth as we move forward from that. So the second chakra is the emotional body, it's the pain body, it's the instinctual mind. And there are a lot of implants that exist in that particular area. So we have our relationship to others. We have our beliefs around our relationship to others. We have our beliefs around our boundaries, our relationships to our inner child, our subconscious programs that we run around our ego identity, like who we're supposed to be or who we think we should be. We have our desire body, which is connected to our addictions. It's connected to our reactive patterns, because all of our reactions are built out of a fundamental desire that was not met. And so then we have our creative intelligence is going to flow through our emotional body. We have female empowerment, so the female principle on that side. And then we have our beliefs around our reproductive system. So our abundance, our reproductive system, all of those are connected to the second chakra. They're connected to, like I showed you with the endocrine image a little bit ago, you can see how a lot of those start to connect that way. So when we have a lot of implants in this area. So for the second energy center, you might have implants around unworthiness. You might have implants around shame or guilt. You might have implants around lack of trust or self-doubt, betrayal / abandonment, anger and rage, fear, entrapment / enslavement. And so when we evaluate ourselves, when we're shifting our beliefs, when we're looking at this, so now you kind of understand on some level, when there's noise at any stage of this circuit, so I'll stop the screen share for a second, if I can. Oh, that's fine, okay. All right, so a couple of things that we want to look at, and I'll bring this back up in a second. So when we have ancestral trauma, when we have different types of trauma that exist on these different layers, we can see those as vibrational noise that is going to change the output signal. And what we have here is a self-regulating circuit that allows us to process these different levels of belief and these different imprints so that we can actually do this healing and regulation work, so that when so our desired output is actually created for us. And so one of the things that we want to understand through this is by understanding, okay, so our root chakra has our cellular memory. If our cellular memory has beliefs around illness, if it has abuse, trauma, shock, devastation, imprints, whether from this life or from other lives, then that is going to create an innate instability everywhere else up the chain. And so we want to understand how this fear programming and in the mainstream, all these different things are used to generate instability and insecurity in that base chakra, so that our ground reference is not a 0-volt reference like we want, and suddenly our entire system is noisy. The thing we want to understand is that we do not ground by walking barefoot outside. That is not what causes us to have a 0-volt reference. We have to heal these underlying wounds so that our ground is existing internally, not in reference to something external to us. So as we do this healing work, we can start to see how we can start to build stability and security, and look at the ways that we feel insecure or feel unstable, whether that's financially or that's in our relationships. It shows up for you in your conscious life if it's there, right? And so you can use those elements to track backwards what they are and begin to see what types of implants they are, understanding that an implant is an implant. It is not you. And so if it is an implant, you can change the structure of that implant to be more empowering. We'll keep working up that signal path. So in the second energy center, we have unworthiness, shame and guilt, lack of self-trust, and the self-doubt and all those things that come from it. So when we find those things coming up, now we know, okay, that's tied to my emotional center. That means there's an emotional dysregulation that's happening in my system. So the downloads that I'm getting are being filtered through the distorted lenses that exist at each of those levels. When we understand an audio system at the simplest, going back to our turntable analogy, if we have noise on the turntable, that's the best our signal is going to get. But let's say we have a perfect signal coming from the turntable, and then we have cables, and then you have power supplies connected to all those other components, and you have several components in the signal path that all transform the signal from one format to another until it eventually gets to the speakers that are going to play that sound back to you. And so at each stage of at that game, you have components that are going to alter the sound in some way, whether in the more noise that exists in the process that component takes the electrical signal through, the more noisy your output's going to get. And so what we can't do is say, I have a noisy emotional center, so I can skip that and say that it doesn't matter, right? So we have to understand that when we have these different components in our signal path, we can't add something to the signal path and have it produce less noise and have it be a higher resolution, cleaner signal. And so what we want to really look at here is these different areas of where our emotional state or sexuality or these different beliefs start to manifest, because all the emotions are really important. What we want to seek are the implanted emotions that are based on beliefs and programs that really are not as empowering as we could be operating on. And that's a process of self-awareness. Like, all this stuff is a process of self-awareness. You know, there are tools like color puncture and things that'll show you that we can start to use that more proactively to dig out specific elements of these belief structures so that we can clean them, right? So a lot of times you hear me referring to color puncture as a regulation tool. It's exactly what we're doing. We're cleaning out noise that exists in the different light body structures that form the meiotic and diotic points that form our chakra system, and the way that that energy flows through us. So as we step up the signal path, we've got all kinds of different other, negative ET implants that create reversals. There's all kinds of things that end up happening where our polarity, the masculine, feminine principles, the polarities of how that energy flows through, get swapped and get reversed in different stages. And so when that starts to happen, our electrical circuit has a reverse polarity. So like, imagine you have two speakers, and hopefully you've listened to two speakers, and you had one where the polarity was reversed. So you had an out of phase speaker. If you don't understand, if you can't visualize that, having not listened to kind of a system that way, think about noise canceling headphones. So the way noise canceling headphones work is they have a microphone at the input, they put an out of phase signal at the output, and that out of phase signal that they're outputting basically is the reverse of the signal that's coming in, and it cancels it out. So that's phase cancellation or deconstructive interference. And so when you do that, and those reversals are created, and you have those different imbalances, you're effectively creating deconstructive interference. So what happens if you have your signal perfect and then it goes through this reversal, and now these still match? Well, now they cancel each other out, and all of that frequency and all that energy and things that you were trying to download and process and turn into an output is gone. It's not getting through you because of the different implants and reversals that exist. And so it's important that we heal the programs. It's important that we clear these implants. There's a lot of different layers of things that we're working through to make sure that when we get this download or when we get this information coming through, it's properly processed through our electrical circuit. So the next step of this game is going to be looking at the throat chakra. So that's going to kind of segue me into some of the other stuff that I want to talk a little bit about. The thing we also want to understand before I get to that is the rational mind. So we understand that we have our root chakra, our base chakra, and we have our emotional mind or instinctual mind at the second chakra. We have our rational mind at the third chakra. We have our astral mind at the dream self astral mind at the fourth. And then we have the soul matrix at the fifth, and then our celestial mind, which is connected to the sixth chakra in that way. And so when we look at how that signal path works, the thing we want to understand is each of these energy centers are transducers. They're slightly changing the way that frequency is processed. And if we look at an audio signal coming through an audio system, well, let's use an even easier analogy. If you have a printer and you print out a black and white piece of paper, or it's just black text on a white background, then you take that piece of paper and you make a copy of it. And then you take the copy and you make a copy. And you take the copy and you make a copy. And so you make copies of copies of copies of copies as you go through that signal path. Well, the ink in that copy machine is not perfect. It's not the original. And so as you make a copy of a copy, the black perfect ink becomes grayer and duller and less fine on its expression on that page. And so when we look at our energy centers, when we have noise that exists or distortion that exists at any of these, based on any of these beliefs, based on any of the imprints in our cellular consciousness, well, those are all going to distort the copies of copies of copies of the information that's being expressed through you. That's then going to show up in your cellular consciousness and then out picture as your physical body, as your physical environment. So all the things that you live in. So last week you heard me say you live in the body of your beliefs. And you literally do, because of how those electrical signals communicate with the cellular consciousness. The cellular consciousness lives those electrical signals based on the voltage that flows across the cell membrane in the form of pH. And then that basically causes the cells to divide and create the surface level result that our body is experiencing, which is why our belief structures about illness, our belief structures in guilt, all of these things are really, really fundamental and important to examine, because they influence how our cells replicate and how our cells outpicture into our physical body that we're seeing. So coming into the throat a little bit more. So we've got the feminine principle, which comes from the second chakra, and that connects very distinctly to the masculine principle in the throat chakra. So that's how, that's our vocal expression. So our throat chakra is our vocal expression. It's how we command energy into physical form. It's that output. So if you remember either the image that Dave drew a couple of days ago that I shared on Instagram, or if you think about the, just the way that they described that circuit last week, you'll find that you have a physical output and then the return side of that circuit. And the physical output comes from that throat chakra through your mouth. And you basically command via those sound tones to create solid form. The same way matter is created throughout the entire universe is a primal sound tone that we all have within us at any given time. So the next step in understanding where to go with this is to really see, okay, so as this stuff steps up through the system, if I have a distortion in my masculine principle, meaning taking action, speaking my truth and living my truth, saying what I mean and meaning what I say and knowing what I mean, right? So it's not just saying what you think you mean and meaning and thinking that you're aligned in that sense, but really analyzing, do I really mean what I say? Or is there a different energetic mismatch that exists as I'm expressing? Yes, those are a couple of them, Scott, that I'm going to be sharing. So all of these connect together. So that's why I'm going to be sharing a couple of those and some others that I haven't shared with you guys yet. But what Scott said was the father principle and mother principle color puncture treatments make a lot of sense with this. And that's exactly right. So we want to understand how that energy outputs through these different energy centers. And as we start to think of it as a co-creative circuit, not a linear circuit, but one that is constantly taking feedback, we can really start to look at this in a little bit of a different way. So let me share my screen on this one again. And I think I still have this open, hopefully. Yeah. So I drew this the other day. Hopefully you may not be able to read it, but I'll go over it again. So let's see if I can do some different colors here. So we've got the root chakra, we've got our beliefs, we've got subconscious programs, we've got our cellular consciousness, we've got our trauma filters, we've got our cellular consciousness, we have our stability, our implants on abuse, on trauma, all these different things get stored as that ground, right? We then have that moving through the general circuit. So this circuit is a real-time circuit. It's not like it started here and then it goes. All of these aspects that are on this screen all work at the same time. And so they're all working in real time simultaneously, very, very quickly. It's not quite as linear a process as I've kind of drawn it here. So what happens is as this gets output, that generates an emotional energy. Well, I'm not gonna worry about it. So that generates an emotional energy in the second energy center based on the beliefs and implants that exist there. So if we have programs here, and we have programs here, and we have programs around our masculine principle, we have programs around our feminine principle, then we're going to have we're innately going to have a jitter or a dysregulation in the output of this particular picture. Okay, and so what happens is we make an output, we do a creative output, we get an outpictured result. That outpictured result gives us an emotional response. Our conscious mind can then evaluate both the emotional response, the beliefs, and the desired creative output. So the heart sets the desired creative output. So the heart with the conscious mind are going to take this feedback and begin to use the conscious mind itself to make adjustments in the beliefs that exist in the emotional center and the beliefs that exist in the subconscious. So again, we have output, we get a result. That result gives us an emotional response. Whether we want it or not, there is always an emotional response of some kind. We get a learning indicator. We can then use the conscious mind to adjust the beliefs, to adjust the programs, to adjust the expectations, to adjust the aspects of projection where we expected a different result. And we can begin to adjust the underlying beliefs and then process that energy again. So now we process that energy again and we get a new result and we adjust course again. And so part of this is tied to the throat chakra very distinctly, because if all we're doing is we're stewing in the emotion, or we're processing and processing and processing and processing and processing, we're literally just looping in this area, right? So if we loop just in that area, we're not actually going to get feedback from our output that gives us any kind of progress. So that's why we need that action. That's why we need that creative output, because it gives us a new result that we can evaluate. Otherwise, we're just perpetually evaluating the same thing and coming up with different adjustments without actually testing the adjustments. So that's where this feedback circuit comes in. Right? So we have a regulation and feedback circuit from the universe that says, here's the output, here's what you wanted, compare the two, and let's see if we can get it closer to the result that we actually want. And that happens through our interactions with people, that happens through, making a business decision, that happens both on the subtle level in terms of what foods to eat and what you think about food and what you believe food does to your body, as well as what you do in terms of all of your other interactions from the subtle to the macro level. So there's some more folks coming in. So there's a lot of layers for how this circuit starts to interact and co-create within you in that sense. And I want you to start to understand there how the feminine and the masculine principles work together to actually give you the feedback that your rational mind and your heart needs to actually shift the underlying programs. Because your rational mind by itself, if you didn't have the heart activation yet to be able to step outside of your egoic programs that exist in the first three layers, the egoic distortions and the fragmentation that's happened to our identity, then we need the heart to be able to step outside of the circuit and say, okay, what did I want and what did it look like and how do I evaluate this, right? So that heart gives us that regulation and that feedback so that the rational mind can then say, okay, I need to adjust in this way. And so now instead of these always operating in different rhythms and in different tangents, you actually get them to compensate for each other so that the output is the correct output. You get a smooth, coherent signal at the output. And all of that happens through that connection to these different energy centers. And then we have to understand on top of this, there's other higher level distortions. So we have the pineal cage that exists around our pineal gland. And so when we have that kind of distortion and reversals that exist here, we have different reversals that exist in the thymus, we have different reversals that exist in the heart. Well, now what we think we want and what we think the desired output is has other distortions on top of it. So we have to really start to zoom out quite a lot to understand, well, there's what we think we want and what our higher soul wants, and there's a miscommunication still between the two until we do a lot of healing work to start to connect those dots a little bit more to those higher aspects of self, just by doing a lot of this healing and self-awareness work. Because part of that is actually just reflecting on the fact that, where did this belief come from?
You know, who told me I needed to believe this specific thing? And can I start to shift that program to be more empowering in alignment with me? Because the only reason I hold that belief is because originally I thought I experienced this thing, therefore I believe it. But it actually works the other way around. You believe it, therefore you experience it. And so realizing that and realizing that it takes a time for the regulation circuit to catch up with the output, we can start to understand, oh, well, I thought I shifted my belief and I created an output, but it wasn't quite what I wanted yet. Well, you have to realize how a regulator kind of works. When the bad voltage, so if this is the normal output, goes up, the regulator drops down to create the desired output. So it's constantly reacting to the transient response of the incoming signal. Well, if your signal is slower than the frequency coming through, so you're getting higher bandwidth frequency coming through, this is going to react really, really fast, whereas the regulator may not have learned how to regulate those higher frequency, faster signals yet. And that takes time to understand and integrate and harmonize so that that can then project into your waking reality more accurately. It also gives you an idea of how moving these frequencies through and how your underlying desires are tied to a lot of these different layers. So let me make sure I covered what I wanted to with that part before I get into the organ specifically. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay, so let's talk about, well, let's see what Scott was asking. So C4 output reminds me of the concept behind heart math, setting that desire and working on coherence. Though, of course, you're not going to target lower layers with something like that. So this does scale out to the morphogenetic chakras beyond C7 as well, right? Yes. That gets a lot more amorphous, I imagine, but can you speak to any work you've done there with the thymus, thalamus, etc.? So the thalamus is our relay center. So it's like a networking hub that connects the different parts of our brain. So we've got so a lot of people think our third eye is our pineal gland. Our third eye is tied to our pineal gland, but it is also connected to the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, and then indirectly connected to a lot of sublayers within the endocrine system. And so what happens is it connects to the limbic system, it connects to the amygdala, all these different emotional regulation systems that are tied to the different energy centers at different points of our body. And so when we look at frequency coming in, it's going to be processed by the trinity of the hypothalamus, pituitary, and pineal. And that process is going to create a time-encoded pulsed signal that's going to be processed through the other energy centers. And what we want to make sure is when we do like color puncture, so if we do the endocrine regulation, the top 2 points in orange, or the ones that we do on the conflict OGT are in rose, what we want to understand is that we are working on the dysregulation that exists on those specific areas, on that specific layer. So the thalamus, maybe we have information coming through, but the emotional body has a dysregulation in it. So when that comes through, we color this orange to regulate its connection to the second chakra being orange, right? So the first chakra is red, the second chakra is orange. When we do rose, or we do crimson, or we do any of these superordinate colors like gray, what we're working on is actually the superordinate information that exists beyond this time matrix. So where the downloads came from initially. And so if there's dysregulation in those particular layers, so there's the information is not, what it does is it helps downstep that particular frequency. So when you do that kind of regulation at that top level, you're helping that frequency downstep into the other layers so that it can actually handle the frequency that's coming through. So if you're getting really high frequency and these are not regulated in time properly, when that happens, as it goes through the other centers, you're going to have oscillation that occurs basically. So the oscillation happens when your regulation circuit is like following the output. So it never quite catches up to basically regulate the output in the desired action. And so when we do color puncture and we do these different things, what we're doing is we're actually bringing the let's say we're adjusting the voltage, we're adjusting the energetic balance and output in terms of how that circuit actually works. So when we look at, for example, every color a lot of times has its it has a balancing color. So we see yellow and turquoise are connected together often. We see blue and orange are connected together. So if we understand that the fifth chakra is blue, we understand the emotional chakra is orange, we see what we're balancing here. So if we're understanding how that works, when we do blue and orange on the hypothalamus points in the middle of the forehead, or we do blue and orange on the pituitary points, which are on the bridge of the nose, and we test them for tenderness, what we're actually doing is seeing whether the positive side or negative side, or the masculine or feminine principles, are shifted in one direction or the other. And that helps to actually bring that back into the center, where the ground voltage reference actually matches what our desired throughput is. So remember I said, the pituitary and the hypothalamus and the pineal are all part of that particular balancing act. So if we understand how that relates to the different energy centers and the colors that we're using, you can start to see how are these different colors used to bring balance to that specific circuit as that frequency flows through you. Because the idea is to have a regulated circuit so that you just get your downloads and frequency and it comes out exactly in the outpictured result that you're desiring in your relationships, in your career, in the things that you desire, and whatever it is that you want to create. And so when we talk about the throat and the different elements of color and things that exist as part of this, the throat chakra is often tied to the color blue. It's tied to the color like a aqua green turquoise kind of color, because of how that blends. And I really think dark blue is in color is really connected more to the pineal. And as we begin to, well, let me think about how I want to tell that. So, well, let me get into the throat stuff, and then I'll talk about that a little bit more in application. So let me teach you the throat stuff first, and then we'll get into the color for it. So we have physical body elements of what happens with our throat that are going to manifest in how all of our other systems are going to function. So when we look at our throat, I showed you guys this a couple of weeks ago, but I'll bring this back up from here as well. And, oops. No, there it is. Okay. Okay, so let's come up to the throat here. First thing I want to show you is how much of the lymphatic system moves through the throat. Okay, so we have a lot of the lymphatic system. I've talked a lot about the lymphatic system being the psychological buffer. We also want to understand where those bottlenecks hit. The throat is absolutely an energetic bottleneck when we see how all these layers start to fit together. So we have the lymphatic system, and we have the nervous system, which you can see if any of this stuff is slightly out, if there's a compression that happens in between the collarbone and the rib cage, if any of this stuff starts to get dehydrated because there's poor lymph flow, well, guess what gets cut off? Your nerve supply. And so there's a lot of nerve supply that happens here. And then we have our thyroid. So our thyroid is actually our energy metabolism. If you understand energy metabolism in the context of how much energy can we output, how can we synthesize our adrenaline, dopamine, and epinephrine, our adrenal hormones, to create energy, and how can we balance that with our gut responses and different things that happen, and understanding that the throat chakra is very much tied to our energetic output, meaning our masculine principles, which I've mentioned. And so we want to really understand how much stuff is attached in this particular area. So beyond that, we have the esophagus, we have the hyoid, we have all of these different elements of cartilage that are actually built over the top of this. And when this all gets restricted, whether it's because you're not expressing your truth, you're not behaving in alignment with your higher truths, if you're not saying what you mean and meaning what you say, if you're not holding yourself in your integrity and alignment in that sense, you're going to have poor lymphatic and energetic flow through that area. When that happens, that's going to cause a decrease in lymphatic flow and hydration through that area, and a pretty big bottleneck in how the lymphatic system can drain from your brain. And so your brain can't clear itself out. Your other systems have to come up and through this area anyway to go back through the heart. And so all of this stuff becomes a really, really big bottleneck for all of these different systems if that is out of alignment energetically or physically. So the physical manifestation of it being out of alignment is always tied to the energetic one first. But we can correct this from both angles at the same time. So we want to be actually, we can release this, get the energy to flow again, and then we can use that energy flow, whether it's a temporary flow or it fixes the problem. We can use that temporary flow to actually reassess and adjust the different like programs that are operating there. So let me see if I can actually draw on this. This is not the best image for this, but I'll show you anyway. I think I can do it. So a couple of things that we're going to do here. There's going to be a well, I won't worry about that too much for now. So what we're going to do, well, I'm going to show you on me. It's going to be easier. Okay. So a couple of things that we're going to do. We're going to release, I'm going to show you how to release the throat, do some just physical release of the throat and some indicators we want to pay attention to. So a couple of weeks ago, we did the lymphatic system. You want to do the lymph drainage and all that stuff that I told you generally before you do this, but they can kind of be done at the same time. I'm going to be teaching several different organ releases based on what we're talking about over the next coming weeks. So as we kind of go through this, you'll find how these different emotions and things are tied to the different centers, or tied to the different aspects of the organ systems that we're working through. So a couple of things. The first thing that we're going to do is the simplest thing to start with is starting at the top, is just gently and slowly moving this kind of the muscle and the meat of the throat side to side. So you're feeling for any restriction. It might make you cough a little bit, but it shouldn't make you choke. It shouldn't make you feel uncomfortable. You might feel some clicking. You want to push it, or just keep moving that around gently. Even if it clicks a little bit, you're not hurting anything. You're actually loosening that back up, and just sliding that side to side and working your way all the way down. And just moving that side to side in that way can be really, really powerful just by itself. If you're doing that on somebody, there's a lot of limbic imprints in this area. So people have a lot of trauma regarding their throat. So if you were born with a cord around your neck, if you ever had past life trauma where you were choked, if you had present life trauma where you were choked, if you've just had circumstances where you couldn't breathe, a lot of this stuff tends to get stuck in this area. So pay attention if you're working with somebody, the kind of like the ways that people react when you go to do this. Be really kind and gentle in this kind of movement, ask their permission, that kind of thing. Because they might have a pretty strong limbic response. They might have they might guard, they might have emotions come up, that kind of stuff just by doing that. And so just starting by working side to side is a really good way to just start that to loosen. The other way you can do it is to grab with both hands. What I'm going to do is I'm basically going to take it in opposite directions. So kind of do this, I'll take it in opposite directions. And you can do that on the top and bottom. And like I said, you might cough a little bit, but generally you shouldn't be choking yourself and it shouldn't hurt. There should be no pain. This can make a really big difference in mid-back pain and in neck pain. A lot of times we don't work that much in this area to get this to loosen up. So just doing that can make a really big difference in how all that flows. Then once we've moved it side to side, working our way down, we've done the opposite direction. The other thing you're going to do is you're going to go behind. The way to do it is kind of to take your two fingers this way. And this might help you, Dave, with if the top of your throat is very tender. You're going to go and you're kind of going to hook behind the throat here, just gently. It doesn't take much. So I'm just kind of going in this area and I'm going to hook behind it. You can kind of feel like you can hook behind that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to gently push in and then I'm going to flick it forward. And I'll do that maybe 3 to 5 times max. And that can be really good also for getting that to release that way. And then, you know, you'll see how that feels. It may fix a bunch of stuff. It may, you know, you may not have a ton of issues in that area. It may not be a physical issue yet, or it may connect to a bunch of other layers of things that we might work through. So those are some really easy, basic things to do for the throat. Obviously, on top of the lymphatic stuff that I taught a couple of weeks ago, it's really good, especially if people tend to have neck pain or congestion. If like this whole area becomes a bottleneck in terms of the lymphatic system, you saw, you know, all the lymph that goes underneath the collarbone. You see all the lymph, the nervous system that goes through the collarbone. If any of that stuff does not have good lymphatic flow or fluid pressure, you're going to dehydrate that area and the signals are not going to be sent correctly, and all that stuff starts to manifest on the surface of the body in terms of pain. We also know that when this gets locked up, our pelvis gets locked up. So this often connects to L5S1. So our thyroid is tied to L5S1. So a lot of people who have low back issues there might have issues with their masculine principle, might have issues with their throat in general, and tension and neck pain could show in their posture. So if they have some of that compression here around its shoulders, you can see where that compression will come in. And that all kind of links together. Like I said, there's a lot of limbic responses here too. So people who have this issue doing limbic treatments, which are in the program, are also really good for resetting those patterns. Once we start to clear this, we want to reset the underlying algorithm, so to speak, so that we can re-regulate and form new images or snapshots so that we know how to process that information. Okay, let me show you some color treatments, which is, let's see, I've got a whole bunch of them. They all play different roles on different things. So we'll see how I end up, which way I want to teach these. So I'm not giving the whole treatment here. I'm going to save these and redo these treatments and post them under the video in the archives. So folks who have the membership to the archives can get access to the full treatment version of these, but I'm going to teach you how to do them. And okay. All right, so the first one we have is the Star of David on the throat. The Star of David on the throat is a really good one for thyroid issues, for embodiment, that sort of thing. So the order is self-explanatory. Let me tell you how to find the particular points. So if your chin is level, that point 1 is kind of directly underneath the chin at the top. It's right above the, like, so if you feel the cartilage that's part of your thyroid, it's that kind of tip point. You can kind of find a pointy spot on that bone there, and it's like slightly above that. So that's point 1. Point 4 is the sternal notch. So it's that notch at the bottom of the neck, at the sternum. Points 5 and 6 are at the outer widths of the SCM. So you can find, that's usually pretty easy. If you can't see it on somebody, have them turn their head to the side, and you should be able to find the inner edge of that muscle. So you'll find that inner edge of the muscle, and that will be the width there. A lot of times we actually have lines on our neck that are in line with that. So it makes it a little bit easier to find that point in that sense. And then 2 and 3 are also the outer edge, are in line with the SCM. but at that bottom point. Let me show you before I go to the next one, kind of how that looks. So we've got the sternal notch, which is down here. If I drop my head down, that bump is kind of right here. So that point is going to be right above that bump. So this is 0.1, this is 0.4. You can see kind of the edges of my SCM here. So right here and here are points 5 and 6. You can kind of see where that line, hopefully you can see it a little bit, where that line is on this part. And then you can see another line down here, which is on the narrower side, where points 2 and 3 are. Okay, and that's also in line with the SCM. So if I turn my head, you can see where that comes up. If I put my finger there, you can see where it is. So if you have trouble finding it, that's the easiest way to find it, is just to turn the head to find that muscle and how that runs. You'll also notice that that muscle runs along some of those lines of lymphatic lines that we did the other day. This one is generally treated in blue. I have done this also in turquoise, but generally blue is good. So all the points are done in blue. You do the points for 20 to 30 seconds each. Remember that point treatments are a lot stronger than stroking lines. So less is more initially if you're finding that it's strong. If somebody has hypothyroid, it'll bring them up. If they have hyperthyroid, it'll bring them down and help to regulate those signals a little bit more. And like I said, hyperthyroid are always indicators of your masculine principle output in general. So you can kind of see how those start to show up in you. And they don't necessarily have to manifest on the surface level as a thyroid issue. So always still self-examine, because even if you don't necessarily have a visible thyroid issue, doesn't mean that you don't have a dysregulation in your masculine output in that sense. So always use it as part of the feedback circuit connected to the other elements, never in isolation, because none of these systems actually work alone. We're just kind of looking at them alone so you can put them back into the puzzle of how all these other energy centers are going to communicate. So that's the first one. Is the Star David on the throat. Is a really, really good treatment. It's a really good one that's similar to, so if you feel really good when you do the thyroid points as part of the endocrine treatments, this one also is going to feel really good for you. I find that it's also really good for just being able to show up and speak. So a lot of our fifth energy center is our embodiment, but we also are starting to realize that our embodiment and our fifth and the resulting output is actually determined by the other centers that influence it quite a lot. So it's not just choosing, okay, I'm going to output. Well, if you're outputting based on a dysregulated circuit, you're going to have distortion in your output, and you're going to wonder why you're getting those results. So we want to make sure that we're always looking at all the nonlinear layers of how this output actually works, so that we can balance, are we working, output, but not getting any feedback back in the way that we're actually expecting. And so then we need to change our beliefs. We need to change our ability to receive the information as feedback. All that kind of stuff comes into play. Oops. Where's my other photos? All right, let's reopen those. Where'd they go? Okay. Yeah, this is a good one too. I'll show you this. I'll show you guys a bunch of them because why not? Okay. Here we have the ellipse of material existence. So the ellipse of material existence is going to play a role in our embodiment, in how we show up in the world, also how we take steps into action. So also our calves and the back of our knees are a really big bottleneck for the fluid pump system. So if there's a compression in those areas, the lymphatic flow, so the energy flow isn't going to work right. And so that can show up in the ellipse of existence as well when we have tight calves, that kind of thing, or instability in the ankles. And this is there. So there's a whole bunch of ellipses. I have 14 ellipses that I can eventually teach you if you want to learn them, because some of them are actually really, really good. This can be a really strong treatment. so it's one that works really well with like the transmitters if you're doing that with me. But it is a big part of our embodiment. Like it has to do with our connection to our body. It has to do with our connection to actually taking action through our body. It also has a lot of connection to subconscious stuff. It has a lot of connection to, yeah. So the way that we do this treatment is you're going to find kind of the center of the calf. It's really the midpoint between the top of the Achilles and the center of the knee. So you find the center of the knee, you find the top of the Achilles, and the midpoint is the center between the two of those. And then each of these are going to be, so the top 2 points are going to be 1 finger away. And the side points are going to be kind of the outer edges of the calf. So if you were to look at the calf from the front, it's the outer edge of what you can see from the front. And so it's not all the way around the calf, but kind of the widest edges of it. Usually a couple of two fingers or so out from that center point, maybe 3 if somebody has larger calves. For this one, you're going to treat the left, then the right. And the first way that I recommend doing this one is you'll do the left in blue. So the left side will be in blue. The right side will be in orange. And what you're going to do, and let me make sure I wrote this down. There it is. Okay. The thing we want to do with that is first we're going to stroke the circle. Let me make sure it's clockwise. I'm pretty sure it's clockwise. I'm going to show you a couple more. Yeah, so you're going to stroke the ellipse 5 to 10 times clockwise. So you're always stroking towards the outside. So if I'm on the right side, I'm going to stroke towards the outside of the leg, the lateral side of the leg, as opposed to the medial. So that is what clockwise will be. So it'll be opposite on each leg. So you're stroking towards the outside. On each of these ellipses, so you're going to do both, you're going to do the left and the right stroking, and then you're going to treat the points. When you treat the points, you're going to start on the right side with orange, and you're going to treat each point for about 10 to 15 seconds. And then you're going to treat the midpoint. So the order is going to work this way. So let me bring that one back up again. Okay, so let me show you this again. So you're going to treat the right side first, then the left. You're going to stroke towards the outside 5 to 10 times. Stroke towards the outside 5 to 10 times in blue. And then you're going to come back to the right side. You're going to treat it in orange. Midpoint, top, right, down, left. 10, 15 seconds. You're going to do the same thing on the opposite. Blue, middle, top, outside, bottom, inside. And so that will be, it's a really good treatment. It's worth doing. Once you do this one a couple of times, you can actually do this one with crimson and light green. If you get to that point and you want to dig a little bit deeper on that one, just ask me and I'll tell you which is to do for that one, which colors to do where. So slightly different, but that's a really good treatment there as well. So you might have heard me say that the thyroid connects to the L5S1, not quite the sacrum, but this kind of has overlap with that as well. So this is the face ellipse. It's hard to do on yourself, but you might use it on somebody else or have somebody do this for you. The face ellipse, same way that this is going to be done, you're going to stroke clockwise. So if you were looking at the face of the clock, you're going to stroke clockwise, probably 5 to 10 times. You can do probably up to a minute, depending on how long it takes you to do 5 to 10 times. And then you're going to treat it in orange. So this is both sides, both of these are orange, the same way, center, top, right, bottom, left, treated in orange. Now, if you're working on this connection to so this is obviously your emotional center. It's connected a lot to the emotional center. It's kind of a bridge between the root chakra and the emotional body, which is a little bit higher than that. If you wanted to tie that connection a little bit more, you can actually do this vertically. So the way that you find the center point is kind of the midpoint of the sacrum. The bottom point, when it's vertical, is kind of going to be the crease. So you have the tailbone crease here, which is the bottom point, and then you're going to have 3 fingers to the center, 3 fingers to the top, and then it'll be 1 finger out to the right and left. When you do the vertical version is going to be in blue, whereas the horizontal version is going to be in orange. And so when you do this in orange, the points are the same, it's just a little bit lower on the ellipse, and it's rotated to the side that way. Like I said, I'm going to post these and remake them so that you have instructions for some of these treatments that are a little bit clearer that way. I just wanted to kind of go over it initially. So I've given you this one before. You guys should, and if you're in my groups, you should have the father ellipse. It is also a really important treatment that deals with the masculine principle, with father wounds in general. So if you have relationships with your father and things that need to be balanced and worked through in some way, even if you don't, it's still a good one to do. This one, you find the sternal notch, which is in the middle of that ditch above the sternum. And then the fingers are going to be 1 finger up and 1 finger down from that. And then it's going to be the outer neck tendon. So where the outer neck tendons meet the collarbone is where the outer edges of this one are. So it's not quite where the collarbone is. So the collarbone would be here. It's a little bit past where the collarbone is. And then you're going to stroke the color clockwise in green. If there's a reaction, so with any of these that I just showed you, if there's a reaction from somebody, whether it's an emotional reaction or any of that kind of stuff, you would just reverse the direction. So if you stroke clockwise and they have an emotional reaction, then stroke counterclockwise until the reaction stops, then return to finishing the strokes in the clockwise direction. Then what you're gonna do, you can treat these points in green, or what you haven't done before, I don't think, is treat these points in turquoise. And so if you treat these points in turquoise, same game, center, top, right, bottom, left, or that's backwards, center, top. Well, let me think, make sure I'm telling you that right. You'll go clockwise, so it'll go to the left. I just said the direction wrong because I was facing the image. So it'll go to the left, which will be clockwise. So I pointed to the right ones. I just said the wrong thing. And that's a really, really good one that ties to a lot of these different regulation circuits. The turquoise is going to work on some of the superordinate elements of what these beliefs and programs are. So it'll dig a little bit deeper than just treating it all in green. Green tends to work on a lot of inflammation as well. So doing it in green and you have a lot of inflammation in this area, that can be a really good thing. If you have issues or you've ever had issues with a father figure, like I said, this is a really good one to do for you showing up embodied and that kind of thing. This is another really good one that is kind of off topic, but it does connect to our throat chakra in the sense of our worthiness and our embodiment and all of those kinds of layers of things. So this particular treatment uses the grays. So if you don't have the gray colors, then you won't be able to do this one. But I think my tools all have the gray colors. And what you're going to do is you're going to treat the left, then the right. The way that these are found is you find the top edge of the ear. So let me show you, it's easier. So the top edge of the ear is the center point, and then the whole width is basically 3 fingers. So you'll have 1 point that's up above, 1 point that's in line with the top of the ear, and 1 point that's about here. And so you just kind of divide it by the width of your 3 fingers there. So once you find that, you can kind of do 1 finger width and just put the thing below it, and then 1 finger width and put and so on. So the way that this one's going to work, the order that you do this one, you're going to do the center and then the top and then the bottom. So the center point is light gray, the top point is middle gray, and the bottom point is dark gray. You'll do the left side, then the right side. And this one, let me just read what this one was, because it was, I think this will be a really good one. Do I has it? I think I did. Okay. So this deals with laterality disturbances. So this has to do with the connection between your inner world and your outer world, you being able to read the feedback from your external world and process it with your internal world and reframe and regulate against that. So that can make a really big difference. For a lot of people, like this can be a really good, profound treatment for people. So a lot of times when you talk to a patient, this might be people who were unwanted as a child. My parents were never there because they had to work so much. I was in the hospital and my mother was not allowed to come with me. My parents quarreled constantly or they divorced. I never had feelings to be loved. I needed always to do what the parents asked me to do. I was never allowed to decide something for myself. That list can be continued. Those kinds of memories are present in the personality profile of most burnout patients. So this is from the burnout webinar from 2006 or 2007. But also more severe events are stored as abuse, strokes, and strong punishments by parents or caretakers. So strong punishments can be embedded here. Abuse can be embedded here. And so out of such situations, the feeling of helplessness arises with respect to all which surrounds the child, particularly feelings of inferiority develop, which hinder the transition into adult life. The pathways divide already at a very early stage. On the one hand, the escape into drug consumption can arise from that neurosis, psychosis can develop already very early. The other group of the youngsters and adolescents carry unconsciously rage about the processes within themselves and act accordingly to the following motto: I will show it to you. I will be better than you can even imagine, or if I am grown up, I will make everything different than what you tell me now. This way, or in similar ways, the motivation seems to work in stressed, tortured, or abandoned children. We can observe distinct activity and enthusiasm within the initial stage of the burnout syndrome. We can also observe high expectations and the permanent ego boost through increasingly bigger efforts of performance. With time, the recognition grows. The one cannot achieve everything and cannot affect all as imagined before. Now the personal effort is increased and their personal needs are neglected. The private life is affected. Family and friends are neglected. Hobbies are not considered anymore. The time of the compensatory satisfaction starts because one would still like to get something from the life. Helplessness, apathy, and the feeling of inner emptiness become intolerable. The people feel like dead. Depressions are the next stage. The feeling not to be loved or not to be loved anymore. The rhythms of sleep are not happening naturally anymore. One cannot disconnect anymore, even in the night, and need for regeneration becomes greater. Despair and sometimes hate onto themselves complete this picture, and the physical complaints and symptoms increase. All those symptoms develop in the first place without a clinical cause. So I imagine that will relate to a lot of people. So I figured this would be a really good treatment for you guys to see. Yeah. And then the red ellipse. So the red ellipse, as you'll see, is a little bit bigger than the ellipse of the face area. This one is done in red. And this one deals with a lot of physical complaints, a lot of physical issues. This one is aligned with L5S1. So when you have some of the throat chakra issues, it's often a good idea to combine the red ellipse with that if they have physical illness and physical complaints that might be tied to that. So this one, you find the medulla point, which is at L5S1, kind of the boundary between the two. And then you have 1 to 2 fingers up and down, and then you have 3 to 4 fingers out to the side. It kind of depends on the size of the person. Usually 1 up and 1 down, and then 3 out is good. If you find that it's a little bit too compressed, then you can increase that to like 1.5 or 2 fingers up and down. It's a little bit of a bigger ellipse. There is also the medulla ellipse, which is a little bit smaller than this. It would basically be one finger up and down and two fingers out. So it's going to be a little bit narrower. And that is done in orange. And so that will all be the same way. So looking at it will be clockwise, center point, or first you can stroke the circle the same way. And then center point, top, in this case, right, bottom, left in red. And so that's a really good one to do. Also, just stroking, remember stroking the lines in the direction that we stroke it, as well as treating points versus, any of these other different ways of treating these points all make a difference. So it's not just the same to just stroke the lines or that, but for some people, it might be enough just to stroke the lines without treating the points, depending on how sensitive they are to the color and that kind of thing. So that's that for the color treatments I was going to share today. There's a whole bunch of other ones, but I think they're, if I show too many, you'll never even be able to use them all. So let's start with those. Let's see what that brings up for you guys. And then we will build from there a little bit and give you a different arsenal. So the idea was to deal with things that relate to the throat. So I was teaching a little bit about the throat. We did the release for it. And hopefully you're starting to see how this circuit starts to fit together between the beliefs that you hold, the programs that you're running through those beliefs, the stability that you hold in your root, and how you can process that. And then the way that your heart gives you feedback based on the emotional response and the way that your mind thinks. And then you can start to really regulate those signals. We can also see that the different organ systems at those different chakras are going to relate to it. So if we tend to have stomach issues and stomach, pancreas, liver, all of these organs are in line with the third chakra. And so when we have distortions in the third energy center, that's going to manifest through those specific organs. When we have distortions in our second emotional center, we might have lower gut issues. And then when we have trouble letting go, we have instability, all that kind of stuff can show, through the colon and that kind of thing. And I'll get into the others as we kind of go through that in weeks to come with releases and different color treatments kind of for looking at each of these. What questions do my coaching clients have? So if you're not in my coaching group, I leave this part of the chat for my coaching clients to kind of workshop the things that they have been working on and answer questions about what we just talked about. And I'll announce some other stuff that are in the works as well after we've kind of gone through this. So if any of you guys have anything you want to talk about related or unrelated, now's the time.
I had a question going back to some of the chakra stuff. So I'm realizing that sometimes you answer my questions and I realize that and I go back and watch this again, but we'll see. So there's a lot of talk, I guess, these days around the body storing trauma. And so I'm curious about, and we've talked kind of at the cellular level and how we affect that with color and belief systems and all this stuff. At kind of like the bigger organ or like fascia level or stuff like that, like do trauma imprints like literally get stored there? And is there like a release that we have to do around that? Or is this kind of like the iterative thing that we've been talking about with color and the belief systems and all that?
So it's multi-layered. So I'll build it. So the traumas and our programs get stored on our cellular consciousness. Well, around our cellular consciousness is going to be water, or easy water or extracellular water. Within that water, we have hydrogen bonds, and those hydrogen bonds can vibrate in any of 6 different ways. When we expose those hydrogen bonds to light or to really any electromagnetic field, any vibration, those hydrogen bonds vibrate in any of those 6 different ways. And then we have a magnetic field generated either by our body or externally that orients those hydrogen bonds. And so what we've created around each of our cells is a 3D resonance structure that our cells use for communication with the higher light body structures that these holograms are tied to. So this water structure and the symbols that exist there can be thought of as the cellular memory that is tied to the light body structure that our global being is tied to. And so these mirror each other in terms of the information that comes through. Well, when we have trauma, that trauma gets stored in cellular memory. Those programs get stored in cellular memory, and the cells moving through time and producing energy, that energy that they produce is based on those underlying structures that are around the cell. So it colors the frequency or the energy that leaves the cell, which is why there's so much work done to dehydrate us, because it changes how that frequency can actually be transmitted. Now that cell replicates, and now you have 2 cells outputting that dysfunctional traumatized signal. Then you have 3 cells. And this happens in different regions of our body, depending on which area has a dysfunctional energetic output or distortion in that output. So maybe it's heart issues, or maybe it's gut issues, or maybe it's pain in the body in general. And so that ends up creating an energetic stagnation because of how that belief is structured, and that cell starts to dehydrate because of the change in how energy can actually flow through it, and voltage can travel across the cell membrane. Over time, that change in energetic stagnation influences the lymphatic flows. Those lymphatic flows change the fluid pressure dynamics in the body. When you change the fluid pressure dynamics in the body, you start to dehydrate the tissues in some areas, and that's going to reduce lymphatic flow and start to compress the tissue. That compression increases the amount of calcification, adhesion, dehydration, all that kind of stuff that starts to happen in the body. That, if that stays long-term, if that energetic state, that stasis stays long-term, it starts to crystallize. And so that crystallized structure is shown in the adhesions and in the fascia that gets built over those structures. That then influences how the muscles activate, how the muscles communicate, because now there's this webbing of fascia that is not passing information and hydration properly to the muscle cells that are connected to it. And so when we do top level movement, we're trying to use our current physiology to reprogram how those electrical signals move, not understanding that that was influenced at a much, much lower level. And so then we can start to work in reverse. Okay, so maybe it's not only movement that we need to do. We need to do fascia work to get the adhesions to release so that that energy could potentially flow. Okay, so we're starting to change the fascial structure to allow that to flow. But what if we have stagnation in the lymphatic system? Well, the lymphatic system has a circuit that it follows that allows the fluid pressure dynamics in our body to actually transmit information properly. If that gets stagnated here, if it gets stagnated in the hips, the whole system gets blocked up. And so then we can see, oh, that's why somebody has pain. Most pain comes from the lymphatic system. And so if somebody has pain, or if they have a restriction in their movement, it's coming usually from the lymphatic system. So treating the lymphatic system first by releasing it, and then using movement to move lymph and move hydration through the body can be really, really powerful. That can also bring up the psychological elements that are stagnant within the lymphatic system and allow that emotion or that energy or that thought pattern, whatever, to come up for clearing. And then we can go that next layer. Once that starts to move better, well, now we can start to more accurately analyze the emotional state that our body is in. If we're in pain and we're so focused on illness and pain that we're focusing on this surface level thing and haven't even been able to dig deep enough to get to the underlying layers that are influencing the surface level manifestation of that. And so now we can start to clean those layers. We can start to regulate that aspect of the circuit. And we can start to then evaluate using emotional intelligence and reevaluate our belief structures that influence how those emotions are showing up. So if we have an emotion showing up and we have an expectation, that emotion is giving us the contrast that we need to evaluate our expectation, well, then we can, from our heart, start to then reprogram. Does our belief match actually what we desire? Or are we running on an inhibition through that belief? And can we then start to look up the negative belief tied to what we'd want that belief to be? So
simply if I believe I can fly, or I want to believe that I can fly, then we need to look at our beliefs about why we believe we can't fly. And then we need to reevaluate all the different negative aspects of that belief to start to reprogram the regulation circuit to be more in line with the belief that we actually want to imprint and how we want to interact with our relationships and that kind of thing. And that just keeps trickling down to the lower levels. And then we regulate that whole system to allow that frequency to actually pour through accurately. And then the surface level body will then course correct, right? And so that's kind of how that can course correct. If we always fix from the outside in, and we're always going to a doctor to try and fix us and to analyze from the outside in, we're literally never going to fix the underlying problem. No matter, it will just be like a chiropractor you just keep going to adjust your back every day. And yeah, it feels great temporarily, but the problem keeps reoccurring because you haven't fixed the underlying cause that causes you to need to go to a chiropractor to allow that nervous system flow and hydration to actually happen. So it doesn't mean there's not a place for all of those different tiers. All of those tiers are really, really important, but we also want to have the higher consciousness to understand, well, I can get a temporary fix and I need that temporary fix to get that flowing, but then I need to dig deeper and get that flowing. And then I need to dig deeper and then get that flowing. So all of these systems can work and flow in the way that we actually want. Otherwise, if we just fix one, we're going to loop at that level. That's
really cool. Yeah, I love how all of the layers and then different systems of the body, how it all interrelates and how you can work at it from these different layers and kind of support each of them or support these different systems. One thing that's been kind of interesting for me this week with some of the physical issues I've been dealing with has been like looking at these things that I would have perceived as problems in the past that I had to fix as like, what is this trying to teach me? Like what's, I'm having these gut issues. Okay, there's clearly a lot of layers here. How can I like, peel them back and kind of unpack this instead of just trying to like have a topical fix, although maybe the topical fix can help to release some of the other layers. But yeah, it's cool stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean that mindset shift alone. Whether you're looking at a physical pain or you're looking at a reoccurring illness, or you're looking at how your body interacts with you in general, all of this stuff, the more you can start to really stand in your power to say, okay, there's something in me creating this, not just something doing this to me, but something doing this through me. So how can I see my body as an incredible transduction machine that transduces what I believe and what I think, how I think things should work. And through the structures of all these different layers of energy and belief, and then out pictures the result in my body. And how can I look at that in reverse and start to hold myself accountable to the fact, okay, I am sick and I've been sick for a long time. And it's not because the doctors haven't figured out how to fix me. It's not because the scientist hasn't given me the research that puts all these pieces together. It's because I hold this innate belief or this underlying program or this belief in illness, right? And what that means and what my worthiness is connected to these things. And then how, I find stability in that program. And I've just told that story for long enough that it became an anchored reality that I live. And you have to then really hold yourself accountable using the ability of your higher intelligence, using the ability of your higher connections to step outside of that and say, well, is that belief even the most powerful? Can I change that belief and just operate on the new belief proactively and see, as I operate on this, I'm going to have the negative show up because I still have those negative beliefs that say illness is real. I have it right now, right? And you're going to have that show up and you're going to have to say, well, I only have this show up because I believe in illness, because I believe in the worthiness that creates this, because I believe in all the other layers that this will start to bring you to. Can I start to focus my energy more so, little by little, into the belief in well-being and the trust and the faith in my body to shift its underlying algorithms as those cells die and reincarnate, to release those old memories and not reincarnate with them, right? Can we release those programs and traumas through the cellular memory so that as that starts to shift in our physical body, all that stuff changes for the better in line with what we actually want to be happening?
What else? Anybody else who's been working on stuff this week for my coaching group? I know we went over a lot this week. We even discussed a lot this week. We had a really good discussion this week. So I think this is probably good to wrap up a lot of this stuff today. One thing I wanted to mention, and I'm probably not going to start this till January. I might start it earlier. I might start it just for people who attend the chat and not announce it more till a little bit later. But one of the things that I'm rearranging for this particular group, and I talked to the coaching group, I mentioned it yesterday, is I've been figuring out how to kind of restructure some of these things, because my passion is teaching this stuff. I really enjoy interacting with you guys, and I don't like where I feel like I'm withholding. And so I'm trying to figure out ways where I can open up the door to the people who really could benefit from this kind of community, while also reflecting on what the community is actually growing into. My coaching group originally was a coaching group where I was coaching them, and they have leveled up so significantly since we started that it's not me coaching them anymore. It's me holding the energetic container and us all kind of working through that stuff together. So it's kind of evolved into a mastermind where we're co-creating this space. And I'm just kind of reeling it back in with just what I happen to know. And so that gives value to all of the people that are in my coaching group, and also allows me then to say, well, okay, if this is a mastermind, that allows me to look at this in a very different light. How can I bring more people into a group that holds that higher consciousness, that is doing this work, that is walking through the process of figuring out what it means to be personally empowered? And opening that up to people to allow that to grow in an organic way, and so that brought up kind of where I want to move this into. So I had my group coaching, and as I've kind of reevaluated how I wanted to do this, I'm going to convert the group coaching basically into its group mentorship program. So for my coaching clients, it'll be exactly the same world. And they have a couple of different options that they're going to be able to weave themselves into. We'll have the archive that you can subscribe to. You can also buy the sessions a la carte. So if there's a specific session like this one that really resonated, or you have stuff to work on, you want to remember it, you can buy the session a la carte, or you can subscribe to the archive to have all of the sessions. Separately from that, you'll be able to subscribe to the mastermind, which will be $250 a month. And so you'll be able to be in the mastermind, and a lot of people will find that in the mastermind, they're going to need, or they're going to want to have the archive to go through some of that stuff. And they're going to want to be a part of the mastermind to do integration from these chats. Because I realize there's so much stuff that can come up from these chats. And it's really helpful to have a group of folks who've gone through it maybe a little bit further than you, who can help you step up in the way that you need. And you'll find that you have gifts that you can kind of give to the group, and we all kind of level up our consciousness and host a frequency safe zone, so to speak, as all this stuff in the world is happening as well. And so this gives people an opportunity to come in and co-create this space, as well as get integration help from me, from my coaches. You can also get, like I said, the archive, but you don't need the archive. So you can come free to these sessions, subscribe for integration to the integration chats, and then we can kind of expand and co-create that space in a grander and grander way, and just see how that evolves over time. And what that does, that actually gives my one-on-one clients a little bit more value, a little bit more focus, and allows me to grow some aspects of that I wanted to do as well. And balance the energy exchanges in all these different places that I'm wanting to be able to do organically. So people will be able to sign up for that. And hopefully that sounds awesome to you guys, and we'll be able to kind of grow that and get more folks into this group regularly, so that you're working through these programs. So you're not just kind of coming to the session. It's like, oh, beliefs do a lot. And then you kind of sit stagnant because you're not really sure how to apply it to your life. And so that's where the coaching groups and the mentor masterminds and that kind of thing start to come into play, so that we can really take these things and help you build the thing you're working on, whether that's your business, or that's an idea that you're trying to create, or you're trying to just show up better and you're trying to heal these underlying things because you're working through them yourself, and you're at whatever stage of that game that you're at. So I think it'll be a pretty cool opportunity for folks. And there'll be other opportunities kind of for, my other coaching clients as they are grandfathered into this with their benefits. And so we'll see how that evolves kind of over the next coming weeks. But like I said, I figured I'd tell you guys ahead of time. If you are interested, just send me a message so I know if you're interested or not. And I'll probably start this new game in January more officially and open that up that way. And yeah, so that's pretty much all I have for today. And I will probably close it up at that. So I think I answered most of your questions if you guys didn't have any more. And I will do my best to kind of get these images together, or at least send them to my coaching group so you guys have them, and we'll get them up on the archive fairly soon after that as well. So, all right, thanks guys. I'll talk to you next week.